Farm4Profit podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm4Profit podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm4Profit podcast.
All right, we have an in-studio guest. We've been on the road so much, guys. This is kind of neat to be back at home, sitting in studio, and this is a much requested topic. You know, Corey, we talked a little bit about hogs and hog barns and hog technology, and I think it lit our listeners on fire that are related to the cattle side of things.
Yeah, well, it makes sense we've done hogs because I think Iowa's the hog capital of the world, but what a lot of people don't know is there's a lot of cattle in Iowa too.
There are.
Yeah. So, Dave,
Absolutely.
Dave, we're bringing back, actually, it seems like an old acquaintance. I'm going to get reacquainted and learn a little bit about what the cattle industry has evolved into. We've got Bill Rubis here. He's the vice president at TenCorp. And TenCorp Incorporated, they started in 2010, built their first deep pit cattle barn then, and we're going to learn exactly what that is. Welcome to the podcast, Bill.
Thanks, Tanner. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah.
And Bill, you've been in cattle for
Since early 2000s.
long time.
Yeah.
Give us a
Are
little
you
background.
calling him old?
I am old.
Give us a little background where you grew up, how you're involved with agriculture, just kind of short.
Grew up in Illinois, came out to Iowa for a completely different industry. Worked for a concrete company not far from here. And back in 05, 06, had the opportunity to do a feed yard, and I thought it was really neat. The cattle producer said, I've got $40,000. How much concrete can I have? And so that's how it all started.
Wow.
And then, kind of moved on from there and started, back in 9 and 10, doing a lot of bed packs, and then that sort of evolved into just doing slatted floor, and that's
Very good.
more what I do.
All right. We've already got some terminology thrown out there. We said bed pack and we said slatted floor.
Correct.
So let's start off right there from the beginning. What's
Sure.
a bed pack barn?
Sure. Bed pack barn would typically have either a dirt floor or lime floor or concrete floor. It's got a roof structure. Most of them that were done a decade ago were monoslopes. Producer would spread typically cornstalk bales for the cattle to get comfortable on, feed bunk to the south side if it was a monoslope. Slatted floor, you're feeding on both sides. Similar to a hog barn, it'll have a pit underneath it, typically 12 or 14 foot deep. It'll have rubber mats on it so the cattle are walking around on Nikes like we would. Manure falls through and you're dealing with manure, 1 week a year typically, where in a bed pack barn, you're dealing with bedding and manure 365 days a year.
Is the slatted, is that full slats?
Yep.
So there's no, like any solid concrete anywhere?
No.
Yep.
No. The only solid concrete would be the sanitary steps in front of the bunks and around the water.
Gotcha.
But everything else would be slatted.
So everything related to cattle barns these days has to do with manure management.
Yep.
No matter what kind, and it's basically all the engineering that's gone into cattle barns is most likely for cattle health.
Correct.
And basically usability to the whoever the operator is to make it easier and more functionable.
Correct. Yeah. We're not, everybody's fighting labor on the farm. So I think labor has been a big motivator to do slatted versus bedding because you're not making round bales, hauling round bales, dispersing round bales, scooping up round bales, taking it back, stockpiling it. There's a lot of, round bales handled 6-8 times depending on the operation through it where, you're going to deal with manure and that stuff basically every day of the year. Where slatted floor, you're going to deal with it 1 week a year. You're just eliminating a ton of labor. Plus, on the other side, the nutrient value out of a pitted barn is just so much better than having it bound up in corn stalks.
So Tanner, I got to think that most of our listeners that probably have requested cattle podcasts of some sort probably are cow-calf guys with a handful of cattle. And what we're talking more here is commercial cattle, where we're talking larger mass. What is your thoughts? Do you think our listeners are small cow-calf guys, or are they feedlot guys?
Yeah, I would say especially the ones that requested Bill by name are definitely fat cattle.
Okay.
So those were where those emails came from, and Bill's suggested guest. But I know that I've seen some cow-calf herds that are utilizing hoop structures and barns like that for the bed pack side of things.
Absolutely. Most guys, it's a great question, David. Most cow-calf guys, if they are going to finish, are going to move their cattle to a slatted floor, 7, 8, maybe 9 weights, where underneath that, Bedpack makes a lot of sense. They're not, quite honestly, they're not shitting as much, and, there's less manure management on those.
So I don't know if you caught this, Corey, but he said 14 to 16 feet or 12 to 14?
12 to 14 foot.
12 to 14 foot deep. How deep are your pits under your hog barns?
I think standard's an 8-foot pit,
Okay.
but they'll go up to 9 or 10, depending on. I don't know what they're building new. I'm sure maybe they go deeper now.
And
8's still pretty standard.
Yeah.
So.
And that's mainly due to the amount of waste that a calf produces versus the amount of waste that hogs produce? Or is it not necessarily sized pit-wise because of that?
So on finishing cattle, it's all about number of gallons. So Iowa State will tell you that fat cattle will produce about 6.5 gallons of waste every day. So you're sizing your pit off of that.
Okay.
And you want to be able to hold a year's worth?
Yep.
Right?
Yep, in a perfect world.
Yeah, in a perfect world.
Yeah.
I know in the hog side of things, there was a time when we were getting double stocked and all that, we had to pump in the spring too.
Sure.
And I really did not like to do that.
So in 12-foot pits, in my opinion, there is a chance you'd have to take some out in the spring. If your program was you were going to feed 1,000-pound yearlings and take them to 17, 18 weights, there's a chance if you have a 12-foot pit, you're going to pump some in the spring. Yeah. If you're going to put in 7 weights and take them to 1,400, 1,500 pounds, 12-foot will probably catch you most years.
So does it, guys? Is there any deep pit application for dairy cattle?
Oh, yeah. There's dairy cattle have had various different pit styles for a long time because their waste is a lot more liquid.
Correct.
And sandy. And they usually use a lot of sand in their operations to where most of those are lagoon style rather than a pit underneath the barn.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure Iowa State Dairy out here has that style. So, yep.
So this is nice to know that this topic can be wide ranging. I know we're going to get some feedback from some of our listeners that think finishing cattle out on sand or in the sand hills is the only way to do this and having it out unprotected. But we're going to get into maybe some ROI of why there's a benefit to this. But but again, for our listeners that don't have a lot of experience, I don't want to skate over a term you've already used, and you said monoslope.
Yep.
So there's different roof lines. So we first talked about different floors, whether it's slatted or solid, because you're going to go deep bed.
Right.
But now we've got different roof lines. What are they and why do they matter?
Well, all have some pros and cons. A lot of, back before 2010, there was a lot of hoop structures put up, which was just, we'll just call it a half circle, typically on 40 foot, that was covered with a white tarp, similar to something we'd go camping in back in the day. And then monoslope and Bedpack became really popular 2008, 9, 10, 11 with Bedpack, and that would be a roof line that just has one plane. It's usually high side to the south so you can capture the sun. And then there's gable roof structures, which is similar more towards a typical house, a big V above the cattle, if you will. So,
okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting because you would think they're just cattle. Why would we have different roof structures, roof lines? I mean, all your hog barns are gabled.
Right.
You don't have any monosloped hog buildings.
But I'm not trying to get air in, I guess, or the sun, and I need a controlled environment in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cattle are a little tougher than hogs,
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so now let's get into the ROI portion of this.
I got one more question.
Go ahead.
The history of it, right? So, I know the confinement of hogs probably, in the 70s was some of the first ones?
Yep.
When did cattle, because history-wise, it was just raised out on lots, right? Fat cattle just out in the open, might have a windbreak.
Correct.
I don't even think that's changed. I think today it's still, I'd be interested to see what Bill says, but I bet 90% of cattle are still out on feedlots.
Yes, you are correct.
But at some point, this came in.
Yeah, this came in. Now, will it grow bigger is the next $1 million question.
So when and why?
Yeah.
So back in the 70s, like you said, hogs and cattle both were outside.
Yep.
And then hogs started going to confinement or structure, and cattle followed right behind it. And then I'm sure we all remember the 80s farm crisis pretty well. And I don't think there's probably any hogs or cattle that were done, new confinements built in that time frame.
Yep.
Then comes the 90s, and hogs made a lot of sense. And, there were, in Iowa, there were some big players that brought in some East Coast money, and now all of a sudden we've got integration and those sorts of things. cattle, I don't think will ever be integrated fully to the extent that hogs are, just because of the gestation time and the amount of time it takes to raise them. But I just feel that the cattle confinement is just 15 or 20 years behind the hogs.
Okay.
So you'll see the evolution.
Okay.
So, before the podcast started, Dave was just telling me about a piece of ground that brought $20,000 an acre. Takes a lot of acres to raise 1,000 head of cattle if you're going to put them out on yards. High price ground is a good salesman for me.
Yeah.
So,
That's true, because your confinement is
Right.
doing exactly that. It's confining the animals to a smaller space.
correct. Yeah, I mean, you could put 1,000 head on half acre ground.
Oh,
if you're gonna,
really?
If you're
Wow.
gonna, if you're going to have 1,000 head open yard, geez, would an 80 catch it? Probably not.
Probably not.
So
And that's mainly driven because of the DNR.
DNR is a big concern. Everybody's worried about nutrients getting in the water. So
Manure management.
yeah,
Yep.
it's a huge deal. And on the manure management, in bed packs, you're going to spend $150 to $200 a year just managing your manure. Where in a slatted floor barn, on your worst day, your manure management is zero. Somebody will pay you for the pumping.
Right.
So not only are you reducing labor, you take something that costs $200 a year, and at some of our sites they're in the manure business, and guys, a good friend of ours, Kyle Lunsgaard, who I think you grew up with, Tanner.
Yeah.
He recognized about $120 to $140 a headspace profit in the sale of his manure. So now we've gone from a negative 200 to a positive 125, 130, $300 swing. That sometimes cattle don't bring that on their turn. Sometimes it could be a year's worth of cattle and might not bring $300 a headspace. So,
Wow, that's a big impact.
It's huge. So we're talking about any positives to why we'd go to a pitted barn and
Sure.
confine cattle. Right. Is there other positives?
sure. I mean, you have cattle comfort, you have cattle health. It's easier to, see sick animals sooner. I mean,
Just like you're talking with your hog barns. Yeah.
right. I mean, if you're going to chase 1,000 head over 80 acres, 100 acres, you're never going to find the sick ones. They're going to hide, where if you've got them up close, it's easy to pick them either from the feed truck or walk in the pens.
Do they gain more, you guys think, because they're not moving around as much? When I'm sedentary, I get fatter.
Yeah, so having, the listeners know that I married into a fat cattle feedlot operation. Correct. And in that operation, they do have a couple of, I'm going to call them outside lots. Mm-hmm. There's just a open-faced cattle shed to the north to protect them from the wind, and it's open. They also have 4 hoop structures,
Sure.
and they've got a deep-pitted monoslope building.
Correct.
And they will put the biggest cattle into that monoslope because they get the most efficient gain at the end of that calf's life. Correct. To really pour the coals. That's their terminology, pour the coals to them. So they can even see 3 different styles on their farm. But he's right. Bill made the comment earlier. Usually a younger calf will do a little better in a bed pack situation, mainly due to it doesn't have as much waste.
Correct.
So it keeps the bed pack in better condition longer. But yes, on that farm, it definitely seems like there's better feed conversion.
Yes, absolutely. I would say, your average daily gain, a lot of guys always want to talk about average daily gain. That always comes back to the quality animal you start with. But your feed conversion can definitely be attributed to the barn. We'll see guys that'll see a feed conversion drop by a pound versus there's, like sites, similar type cattle outside. Mm-hmm. So it's big dollars.
It is.
Is it more consistent then? Because I mean, they're getting? You're still feeding same amount of feed. Are they just getting to the bunk quicker, faster, easier?
Sure, it's like you on Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah.
You've got your lazy boy and you've got your buffet out, and you've got to take about 3 steps, and guess what? You're going right back to your lazy boy.
I like it.
And I would say it's probably not the perfect conditions all the time, but it's a heck of a lot better than being out.
Correct.
In the open, like a snowstorm, they're not getting snowed on. Blizzard, they're not getting wind. In the hot summer, it's probably got a nice wind going through there and no sun on them.
Correct.
So they're not having a bad day.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, in the monoslope that my in-laws have, if it is a hot summer day, one of the best places to go is up in the catwalk. In that, the amount of air that's flowing through that building, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
There's no fans. It's just naturally air flowing through that area.
Yeah. Yep.
But this is good. So we kind of hit on here. We're going to keep our animals sheltered. They're going to be out of the weather. We're going to provide them a more consistent environment, which is more than likely going to help with feed conversion. You've already hinted on the way to manage the manure side and how much value that could provide our listener if they want to go this direction. You talked about space, not paying for a large tract of land when you're able to confine animals to a smaller space, potentially generate a little bit more of an ROI there. You touched a little bit on the labor side. Let's go more into that.
Sure.
So when we're talking open lots, I don't have a lot of experience with big, large open lots, but I know that they'll have ranch hands that usually go horseback, spend all day, like you said, walking the cattle and pulling out anything that might be sick. But kind of compare all the way through the different options.
Yeah, we don't, in Iowa here, and obviously I understand your podcast goes farther than that, but in Iowa we don't have a lot of, 50, 100,000 head feed yards. They just don't exist. Now, certainly, as you mentioned, out in Sandhills or in Texas or Arizona and obviously Colorado, there's a lot of large feed yards where guys are on horseback. We were fortunate enough, we had a cattle producer that has, of all things, 250,000 head of all natural Holsteins on feed in Arizona. He flew up a few weeks ago. He's thinking about putting up some barns. And the interesting thing was he found that all of his work comp came from his pen risers on horses.
Oh, really?
And his work comp claims were so high, they eliminated the horses. Now they have to walk 250,000 head on foot.
I didn't think about that.
That was my number one thing of going to was not having to have horses. I wrote it down right here.
Yeah.
No horses.
No horses. So.
I was waiting for you to make a joke about not having horses.
Or
in
at
your
least
hog
if you
barn.
have horses, it's because you want them, not because you need them.
That's true.
Correct. 1,000 head to walk them in a half acres. One man can chore 1,000 head a couple hours a day. One man couldn't chore 1,000 head in open feed yard in a day. He'd never
And then
stop.
you were talking about, so we talked labor-wise, and we're all about profitability. So we talked about less acres as well. But then you have this pit of manure for the remaining acres. Is there like a formula like, half acre barn and however 1,000 head that we have a confined animal feedlot? How many acres of manure do we get? How many acres of...
So the quick answer to that is 2 head per acre. So if you have 1,000 head barn, on average, you should have about 500 acres of manure a year.
Okay.
That's good. I like those cheap formulas.
Yeah,
perfect. Yeah. So if we had 500 acres, then that's about the size that we put, and we want it in proximity probably if we're going to be building this thing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
What? Before we continue to hit more on the positive side, I know we've got some listeners that are probably shouting out their radio telling us that we're idiots for not thinking there's a downside.
Sure.
Let's hit some of those in the middle of this. What's a downside to building a confinement barn?
You don't get to ride horses.
Well, you don't get to ride horses.
That's a good thing.
Easy.
You don't have to buy hay for the horses.
You don't have to buy hay for the horses.
The downside of it would be obviously it's a large upfront cost. I mean it's a you being on the banker side of thing, it's a number. So I'd say the downside is just the pure upfront cost. So
That's it.
Yeah.
So if we can pay for it,
we
really haven't come across anything else that might be an issue.
What about lawsuits?
Yeah, I was going to say
PETA
CAFO type
and,
stuff.
And
I would
neighbors
from the hog side of things.
And yeah, I mean, like
That's true.
My neighbor put up a couple of monoslopes, and the neighbors just went crazy calling the DNR, and he didn't have 1,000 heads, so it was under the limit that there was no issue, and they got in a battle between each other, so he put up 2 more and told them, you're never going to see the light of day, and he just had screw you money to put up more and more.
Exactly. Iowa is a very ag-friendly state, and I mean, we're always going to have the neighbor that doesn't like us. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're going to put up a hog barn or a cattle barn, or you're just going to grow something other than corn and beans. There's probably going to be people that are upset. You are correct. Obviously, we live in a world where PETA and people like that exist. The big question that I always have when somebody wants to bring up, well, should it all be done in open spaces? Well, I don't think we have our children outside on the worst days of the year, weather-wise. So why would we have a large investment sitting outside weather-wise? Stomping around in mud, or even you look at what we've had here in Iowa the last few weeks. Really warm today, and tomorrow it's frozen. Well, when it's really warm, we have big ruts. Well, now you've got an animal that's going to step into a rut and break a leg.
Right.
Where you're never going to have that in a slatted floor confinement.
Yeah, that's the biggest kind of conversation that I've heard a lot when you talk about response to PETA or an environmental agency. I shouldn't even say agency, a group that is continuing to put some focus on this is, would you have your dog outside?
Correct.
They're all animal lovers, and then they want animals to just roam free. So
we talked about this with automation too. We did another podcast just recently on cameras in buildings and knowing which ones are sick. And as artificial intelligence comes out, notifications to phones that say, "Hey, number 247 needs a little attention," et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we're seeing that brought into what I'd call research facilities, test barns, that sort of thing. A lot of ear tags are now being equipped with sensors, whether they, number 247 didn't go to the water as much as that animal did yesterday. So let's grab that. They're taking temperatures, they're different things like that. It hasn't been fully integrated to a large scale as of yet, but I do believe it's coming.
So, $1 million question as an auctioneer, having worked livestock markets.
Yep.
As I'm out there, where people market their cattle when they have 300 head,
Sure.
so they're not huge confined animal feedlots. When they're not, they take them to the local market, and we are their source for gaining top price.
Correct.
Okay, and JBS and Packerland and American Foods and everybody comes there to bid top dollar on their cattle as they market their stuff. Now Corey markets directly through an integrator, and the integrator is going to, we're taking money in the margin.
Correct.
Do you think cattle is ever going to go to where? I mean, I know some big guys that they go direct to the factory and they have a per pound, per hanging weight, etc. Does that eliminate the cattle auctioneers?
I think for our lifetime, cattle auctioneers are probably okay. But let's look at, you look back to, our grandparents' age when they're, Chicago, Sioux City, Sioux Falls, they all had large cattle yards. And now they went to, to sale barns. And then, the large companies just, they just keep finding ways to go direct. So do I think there's a death of a sale barn? Probably not in our lifetime, but I do think it's going to go away. I mean, when was the last time you sold hogs at auction?
Never.
Right.
Correct.
So,
County fair, probably.
right, but but never.
Hasn't happened even.
So that's not the way I thought you were going with your question. And I was getting excited because you had thought of something that I wouldn't have ever thought of. So I'm still going to give you credit for it.
Well, that's good.
We know what hog confinement sites sell for after somebody's done using them or retires or moves on.
Correct.
Do you have good examples of these cattle confinements that have been built and have to be resold?
Well, the good news is, you being on the banker side, you're always looking for comps. To my knowledge, I don't think there's been a slatted floor confinement that's changed hands outside of family. Now, there have been some bed packs that were done a decade ago that have sold the last few years. And I would say that they're the ones that I've seen for sale. And Dave, you could probably weigh in on a little bit of this. Seems like they were worth, 60 cents on the dollar of construction costs when they were built.
Okay.
But slatted floors, we haven't seen anybody, quote unquote, go backwards on it. So we haven't seen them.
What is the longevity? If wind towers are 50 years and solar panels are 20 years and hog buildings, how are you until they?
I'd say 30, 40.
30, 40. What are
But you're refitting. You're not 30, 40 without touching. There's still the guts are getting redone.
Yeah, probably with one major remodel, I would say.
Yep.
40 years.
15 years to 40 years, but with a redo. But you're really super manure is acidic on your side. Is it just as acidic in cattle?
It's not as acidic, and
I don't know if it's acidic. It's corrosive.
Corrosive.
Yeah,
there we go.
There's a lot of salt.
That'd be a better
Yep.
adjective. But do you have any rubber on your hog slats?
No.
No, because hogs eat it.
Well,
So-
yeah. Hogs eat concrete.
Right. So, I think the concrete will hold up better under cattle because they do have a rubber mat.
I gotcha.
So, but no, to answer your question, I would say it's a 50-year build if it's done right. your wear items are going to be the rubber mats. You're probably going to have to replace rubber mats 10 to 20 years.
Yep.
Something like that. But typically, if there's a repair, it's because of operator error. Somebody hit something with a piece of equipment.
Yeah.
So.
But when 10 Corp is building, you guys are wood framed.
Yep. So we're concrete above where any cattle could get, and
Okay.
then we're going wood up, and then wood rafters, plywood, felt, and tin on top of it.
Because the building my in-laws have is mostly steel.
Yeah, wood and steel combo. Yep.
So is there an advantage to one over the other?
Depending on the size of the structure, pre-COVID, there were instances where it made sense to go wood steel like your in-laws did. Post-COVID, steel runs more than wood, so the economic advantages aren't there. We all can go to our grandparents' farms and see the wood structure that was built 100 years ago. Nobody can take me to a farm that steel structure is still standing from 100 years ago, so we don't know the test of time on it.
Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way.
See, and I was thinking concrete. I get a lot of people that don't want to do concrete because it costs more, but I see lots of barns with concrete or stone or mason foundations that are still standing to where the others were not.
Correct.
Or the wood's rotted. So
it's even cool to see some slip form concrete elevators that they've been poured years ago.
Right.
There's some concrete from like the Roman times that they made that is still intact.
Yeah. And cattle are hard on everything. I mean, it doesn't take. You can put a brand new building and they will rub against it and they don't know their own size strength. And so everything gets bent, everything gets broke. This is where all you grain farmers out there have a park the nice combine in the nice shed and you're always watching to make sure nothing break. But you're the limiting factor where now we're trusting all these animals to break everything.
Yeah.
And I swear that the cattle guys get a bad rap for everything being broken, but I think they get broke because of what
they do rub on everything. I remember our old cattle barn. All the wood in there so smooth. You couldn't sand it that smooth.
Couldn't get a sliver. No, that's a good point. Okay, so mid-show, a little bit of a summary. We talked about a lot of different styles to raise cattle. We kind of arrived at a point to where if money was not an option, we want to put them in a deep-pitted, either gable or monoslope roof barn that's slatted with the pit underneath of it. That seems to be the most efficient, whether it's labor-wise, manure handling-wise, potentially feed conversion-wise. It sounds like it might be the most profitable way to grow a calf, as long as money's not an option to get it built, because we learned that is probably one of the biggest
barrier.
Yep.
I got a question now. You just made me think of, but keep going.
Well, I was just going to move into, if that's the barn we're going to design, how do we know how big and what pen shape? So if you want to put
let's go a little more global here.
Okay.
As we've got to travel the country, thank you to all of our partners for letting us do that and interview people everywhere. We have more acres. We talk to people that like 40 acres is a lot, or 15 acres, and they're farming these little 15 sections,
Sure.
But they have cattle in their area, but it's not as spread out as the Sandhills. We're not in Montana, big sky country. So with that, I'm trying to think of implementation outside of the Midwest.
Sure.
So if we go to Texas, is this going to work? If we go to, what's your experience all across the nation for listeners or worldwide?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think we will see a movement to putting all cattle under roof in our lifetime. Reason being, we all watch corn do what corn did at harvest last year. Mm-hmm. I had the opportunity to spend some time in Amarillo, Texas, with the second largest feeder in the United States, and they were $3 positive basis on every bushel, and they have 750,000 head on feed every day.
Wow.
You got to start moving stuff back up here. We got to bring the cattle to the feedstuffs. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of technology that's being entered into the beef space. Everybody's familiar with digesters on dairy, and you're going to start seeing digesters on large-scale feed yards. We've spent a lot of time with a gentleman by the name of Bill O'Neill in Bion Environmental, and he's going to start doing digesters on beef feed yards. And all those cattle will have to be under roof so that we can always deliver fresh manure to them.
So I know a little bit about this, but explain to me farther, digester.
Yep.
So we're taking the manure and we're turning it into something.
Yeah, so most people think about it when they're thinking about a digester that they're going to draw off the methane, and you're either going to scrub it and sell it off to the gas pipeline, or you're going to not have to clean it as much and run generators and sell electric back to the grid. But what we're seeing in digester technology is they're going to take it, they're still going to do that, but then they're also going to, with the digest state on the backside, start doing some really creative things. They're going to start pelletizing nitrogen, so they'll be able to ship it anywhere in the world. There's some hydrogen technology that's being looked at with Bion to start shipping hydrogen molecules. Germany's made a effort that they're going to go to a hydrogen-based energy for the country. Hydrogen is very volatile to move, but if you put it to a nitrogen molecule, you can move it. So I've learned a lot about that in the last year. So for the actual biomass, though,
where we still have manure. Okay,
Yep.
We took all the goodie out of it, but we still have manure. If other people don't have the acres to spread this manure on,
Sure.
Or soil to
Correct.
make more soil biomass, what's the implementation there? Is there a way to go with that if they still want the beef?
So the interesting thing, post digester, you're left with digest state, and being it's come out of an animal, run through a digester, it's now considered organic, and there's a huge organic demand for manure.
That's what you're going to see at Menards, Tanner.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And
And
there
probably
is
higher end garden shops.
You're going to,
Yeah, and the interesting, Corey and I and a lot of my customers have all had the same conversation around the biggest expense to handling manure is the water.
Correct.
And if you can separate that out,
Yeah.
running it through a digester, I assume clean water comes off of this as well.
Well, yeah, you certainly can. And so with Bion's technology, they're going to ship about 85% of the water back to the cattle. It'll be drinkable to the cattle.
Yeah, so you no longer have to
So that could lower
worry
your
about
bills.
hauling that.
I'm sorry, Dave.
That could lower your bills.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then, I jotted down, you said they could pelletize nitrogen and ship it all over the world. And I put why. If you have cattle in an area where you grow crops, it now becomes a resource for the row crop farmer, or the row crop side of your operation is pelletized nitrogen, which is a lot easier to transport, Corey, than in a slurry tank.
Do you guys know what the 3 biggest elements in growing a crop is?
Water, sunlight, and food.
Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Oh. So hydrogen, right? So what are you putting on? You're pelletizing nitrogen,
Correct.
but then you're talking about hydrogen. And
So
I'm thinking
transport.
anhydrous is NH3, so it's nitrogen, hydrogen,
Right.
right? Are you making anhydrous, or how is that?
The technology hasn't been explained to me enough.
Okay.
To
It's beyond, okay.
It's beyond.
It's a
it's beyond-
chemistry
it's a-
experiment.
It's a chemistry experiment.
Got it.
But back to your question, Tanner, when you're hauling your hog manure, how far can you haul it?
Oh, yeah.
Where it's still
I
profitable
mean,
to you.
6 miles is as far as we can go, and that's expensive. I mean,
Yeah, same
tanker.
thing with cattle manure. It's about 6 miles as the crow flies.
Yep.
So
what
you're
are-
limited.
What are all the major pits doing now? Okay, we got future technology that we're
Correct.
talking about that's awesome.
Yep.
What are we doing now? If I got a 14-foot pit, is it just like hog manure? Am I taking a pump, pumping it out, drag lines across the deal? Are we doing irrigated?
So it'd be too thick to do anything through like a Nutri-Drip line or a subsurface irrigation without being processed beforehand. But,
Correct.
We hope to have an episode here in the future to talk about how much processing goes into to where you could fertigate. That's the terminology, correct?
Fertigate. There we go.
Yep.
That's what I was
So
looking
yes,
for.
right now I would say the manure is handled either through a conventional drag line for manure application or through it being tanked.
Which that equipment's expensive.
Correct.
I sold a bunch of that, and I was just surprised at how much that stuff
That's
costs.
why we don't haul our own
It's-
stuff, because we'd have to have 3 semis with tankers, 3 bodies sitting in there running it, a guy in the applicator, someone running the pump.
So what we might have saved in labor on the cattle side, we may have spent in manure
I'd probably have to
management?
spend $250,000, probably $300,000 just to be able to pump my own barns if I want to haul it more than a tank.
Yes,
do?
but no, because when you put it into this format, the nutrient format of a liquid pit barn is more advantageous to the row crop farmer than a bed pack.
Correct.
So you still, when you have a bed pack, that's your cornstalk bales hauled in, your manure turns into a compost that's hauled back out and spread. So you still have a process there as well, but that is not as, I got to think of the word.
Lucrative?
Corey might be able to help me out here. It's not as,
Nutrient rich.
yes.
Yeah,
And-
it's a lot of carbon is what
Correct.
you're dealing with, and then you're paying a penalty because it takes a lot of nitrogen to break down
Carbon,
the stalks.
yes.
Correct.
There's nutrients in there, but you're actually hurting your crop because you need more nitrogen to break that down.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah. So the potential offset in what it would take to get the liquid manure hauled, as Bill said early on in the conversation, is you'll find someone willing to pay you to have it hauled away if you don't want to mess with it, because there's that much value in the manure product.
Yeah. So when a guy's making $120, $130 a headspace on his manure, that's after all the bills are paid. That's after paying a custom applicator. What are you paying, 2 cents a gallon?
Yeah, about a little bit under that.
Hey,
but yeah.
Joel, how far you going?
Yeah, yep.
But yeah, penny and a half, penny and 3/4, 2 cents, you know.
So do you have
But then
any?
$145 an hour for a truck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you got me wondering. So if you can, give me numbers. Like, so now I want to buy one. I want to buy one, and I'm going to put this on 500 acres I own. What's this cost?
Yeah. So
10 million?
Oh, no. So 1,000 head barn.
Yep.
You're going to be $2 million by the time. $2,000 a headspace will get you a
2,000 a headspace.
nicely optioned out cattle barn.
Okay. And so then
You
how
could
much?
certainly do it in the 1,700.
So do most of the guys that do this already have cattle?
Yes. Yeah.
They already have the cattle.
Yeah.
So if you're a brand new podcast listener and you just say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to spend $2 million and go get a loan from Tanner because he's a nice guy and going to loan me $2 million, I still got to buy the cattle.
Correct. Yeah. So, and you got to buy the feed.
So I got to buy 1,000 head of cattle.
Right.
And feed. So how much do I make?
How good a producer are you? How good a cattle?
That goes back to the balance forward episode that we did, to where that's going to be different for every operation.
It is.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's going to come down
You
to how efficiently you can get your feedstuffs,
Yeah.
and then how efficiently you can convert that feed to pounds, and what your marketing skills are.
Now so 10 Corp is the only construction company that I'm aware of in the cattle industry that will, if you were a young producer, and Tanner said he's going to lend you money, if you had somebody that'd fill you, we'll fill you for 5 years, which I think is a big, big deal for young producers.
Oh wow.
So you guys own cattle.
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
we're heavily in cattle.
Well, that's a unique take. I didn't expect
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's why I asked the questions I asked.
Now a banker who's looking at Dave thinking, boy, am I going to lend him $2 million? Well, if he knows that essentially his building payments are going to be made for the first 5 years, I'm
Yep.
guessing as a banker that looks a little more attractive.
Oh, it helps. Absolutely. I'm still going to be concerned about year 6.
How does that look? So, I mean, I know in the hog side of things, we
Yeah.
get paid per space.
Yep.
Per year.
Yep.
Is it per space per year on cattle?
It's per space, per head per day. So, the typical number that's tossed around is about 45 cents per head per day.
Okay.
Plus there's a feed markup and, vet and poles and stuff like
So
that.
are you guys providing the feed or the farmer, or how's that
So
work?
our first question, we would always like the young producer to provide as much feed as he can.
So that could be a profit.
absolutely
Deal for them.
Absolutely. And then whatever they can't provide, then we're more than glad to provide the rest of the feed.
Corey, you could convert your barns. You could do cattle. Be way cooler.
Way cooler.
I've thought about that before. I've thought several things with the hog barns because I'm not a big fan of the hogs, but take the slats out
Yeah.
and then dig them out so they're like a walkout basement, and then I have taller roof.
No.
and then
Barndominiums,
it'd be a
hogdominiums?
deep pack because I don't know that I think my cattle would go through my floor probably.
Yeah. Hog slats are thinner than cattle slats
Yeah.
because of the weight of the animal.
And I can't get a skid loader in a hog barn, so I need to be
Yeah.
able to get a skid loader in there, or a tractor in there.
Okay, so now let's get back to the question I was getting ready to lead into when
Yes.
we're talking about we want to build a barn.
Yep.
How do we determine what size?
So what is your current operation? Because nobody's calling us that isn't in cattle today.
Yep.
So what is your operation, and then where do you want to go? So earlier you alluded to pen size. So let's say a producer has some outside yards and there are 150 head pens. Well, we're not going to take those out of commission. We should still use those for lightweight cattle to get them started. But then let's design a barn that's got 150 head pens, so we're just move them right in. Most popular pen size is probably 150 to 200 head per pen. You get
And that would be what square footage?
22 square foot's common.
Okay.
So.
Is that what the DNR? Does the DNR set that?
Nope.
Nope.
Nope. That's just where it's kind of landed over the years as to that's kind of a sweet spot.
Kind of trial and error.
We've got some guys that are down to 19, and a conservative guy might be 24, 25. But at 25, cash flow from the banker side gets a little tight.
Does it matter on the type of cattle? So now you got me thinking size and square footage and now frame score.
Sure.
So are we a frame score 7 or are we miniature Herefords?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Now, granted, we're talking size for weight for feed cattle, but yeah, I didn't know if
22 is probably the number across the board.
Okay.
So as you look at that, we also can't necessarily just say the pen's going to be square, because we need to pay attention to the available bunk space.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the access to water.
Correct.
What's the bunk space conversion?
So typically we're looking around 8 inches of bunk space per head.
Okay.
And then on water, 1 square inch per head.
Okay.
Is the rule of thumb, and that's come out of Iowa State and K-State and stuff like that.
So you just made me think, okay, utilities now. So now we're talking water and electricity and okay, when we think holistically profit, we're thinking all the bills.
Correct.
Did I lose any equipment by feeding inside? Do I need the big tractors? You talked about skid loader. I'm like, well, I can't fit that huge manure spreader inside or that big tractor.
Sure.
Do I lose equipment? Do I save money on not having to maintain?
Oh, absolutely. On a slatted floor barn, you'd truly need a tractor and a feed wagon.
Okay.
Where in a bed pack, you'd need a tractor, a feed wagon, you'd need a
Bale buster probably.
bale buster.
Yep.
You'd need a skid loader to get in and clean out the pens. So yeah, there's a substantially less.
I see everybody having telehandlers now to stack higher. Do you guys have a telehandler?
Oh, yeah.
For stacking higher? Just
It's
because,
actually, I would state, if you wanted to be the most efficient, and if you have a deep-pitted barn, you still want your telehandler, because then you don't have to open the gate to take the deads out.
Correct.
You can just boom out over the
boom
fence.
out over the fence.
You have
Okay.
livestock, you have dead stock.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of guys will just put a 6,000-pound winch on their side by side and do it that way as well.
Yep.
All precast guys will tell you do not drive equipment out there.
Before we get too far from it, we're talking
on the precast.
talking square footage. Have you guys been affected by Proposition 12, California, like the hog industry or anything like that? Like,
No, thank goodness.
yeah. You're lucky there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have class on that next week.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like where you were going about the equipment side of things, because there's more. Like you said, right now you're not getting any calls from people who don't have cattle.
Correct.
So everybody's starting to build up their infrastructure already before they call you. But we've got a lot of listeners that are learning right alongside this process, because they want to make a change to their parents' farm. They want to continue to diversify their own.
Correct.
There's more than just a tractor and a feed wagon that goes along with this, because the commodity management is a lot different than Corey in a hog barn. Corey needs a couple of bulk bins.
Yeah, correct.
Correct.
And that's the only feed management Corey has on a hog barn. What's it like feeding cattle?
Great question, and I didn't address that properly on our earlier question. Yeah, typically most guys will have a bunker for either silage or cracked corn, that sort of thing, and then typically a 3 or 4 bay commodity shed. And you are correct; you probably want a payloader to load your feed wagon there.
So do they?
But it's shed.
Is it integrated into? Bad word to use, I guess. Is it the same building? Is there commodities building when you guys are designing a building? Do they take one end and lean to it, and that's your commodity shed,
It's
or does
typically detached?
everybody detach it? Okay, that's what I was curious.
Yeah. Because that's the interesting part, that if people have never set foot on a feedlot or a dairy, is the commodity portion of this. Because just as much as Corey knows, if you get some bad corn into the ration that comes through your hogs, it throws them off. Same thing with cattle is you want to maintain as consistent of a feed ration as you can.
Well, and guys change that too. They'll do dry distiller's green and DDGs and cottonseed hull, and I mean, I've seen guys mixing all kinds of stuff just to figure out what to fill and add the same nutrient value to it. And
But having a roof over it and having dedicated bays to each product
Correct.
is something
Certainly
that helps maintain the quality.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's
Now, I
not
wonder-
getting rained on. It's not catching sun. Or
How many
rain.
of those guys that have storage for hay now that are maybe the dry pack, Bedpack barns, could they convert those into commodity sheds? I mean, do
Oh,
most of them-
absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, like our hay's all inside, but we are small. We're not huge. You know, most of them guys I see, they're just stacking it outside, but there are a couple that they're just making huge roof structures to cover their hay and corn stalks.
Yeah, a hoop's not a bad way to go about it if you're going to store a lot of bales. Yeah, I mean it's a good cheap structure for that. Absolutely. So we'll see a lot of guys.
Everybody wants a payloader. I mean,
Who doesn't?
who doesn't want a payloader?
I saw one today for $200,000 just to lift stuff.
But it's really heavy.
Yeah, it is.
It's not just to lift stuff; they're really fun to operate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but I will. Yeah,
like
and as you go ahead.
It's like on Shrek, you know, when he says everything has layers. He says, you know what else has layers? Parfait. Everybody love parfait. Everybody love parfait.
Like, where is he going with this? Because we all know that I'm not good with movie quotes.
No.
Everybody needs a loader.
But yeah, back to the commodity shed thing as well. You know, like you stated, having a hoop building or something like that to store your dry stuffs. But I know from experience that you probably, if you want to look at overbuilding something, you should overbuild your commodity storage, because if you're gonna run your payloader into that pile every day, or push against a back wall every day, or whichever it is, you know, a lot of the wet feed is heavy. You know, so making sure that that's overbuilt is probably good advice.
Could you do the Lely like the dairy people?
You
Can
can
you do that on the fat cattle side? Have you seen that?
You know, there's some technology in Europe, which obviously Europe doesn't feed cattle at the scale we do or the weight. That's a robotic feeder. 6-7 years ago, 10 Corp did, I'm going to say 6, 8, 10 projects where they went back to the old center feeder. So the mixer, it eliminated the mixer wagon, and then it was sending it to the belts down the barn. And on green sites 5, 6, 7 years ago, that made sense.
What are green sites? I don't know what
So,
green sites
so
are.
it's just a field today. You've got nothing there.
Oh, okay.
So,
Just a new, brand new site.
but that the belts and the motors and that all have increased in price, and so there's not a price advantage to do that anymore. The robotic feed, you know, snack feeding is very popular in Europe, where they're feeding 5 to 6 times a day. You know, your large feedlots in the south are feeding 3 times a day. We're typically in Iowa, mostly we're feeding twice a day. So, do I think it's coming? Probably.
Yeah.
But it'll be a while.
I just think of labor and all that kind of stuff. It's one more. I mean, you take
they're-
it all the way down to nothing, and then there's no one.
Automating everything else
Yeah.
for crying out loud.
And you get the exact perfect ration because that thing's just that crane's just sitting there taking out of each commodity bay. And
I also
mixing.
look too, though, you know, having the hands-on experience on the farm of my in-laws is handy, because I can go and I could shake the bucket a little bit, and all of a sudden a big chunk falls out, and now I'm over what I was supposed to put in. But the monitoring that we have through the feed trucks and the scales and the digital platform that they use, Performance Beef, you can get pretty close.
Yeah,
And-
I'm a huge fan of Performance Beef. It's been a real game changer to the cattle
Yeah.
feeders here in the upper Midwest for sure.
And then I look at the floor plan, the outlay of that feedlot that I get to help out on, and I think about, because I did after talking to Dairyman Dan, think about what that would look like to feed it with robots, and everything's so spread out. I mean, it's still confined in an area, but it's still spread out over 15 acres.
Right.
So to have enough robotic track for that robot, or 2 or 3 robots to be cycling in and out, there's still a lot to think about as far as taking an existing feedlot and converting that to robot feed.
Correct.
So
We are seeing, and this is really bleeding edge stuff in cattle feeding, and it's certainly in large feed yards that are contemplating putting up large structures. They realize their weakness in their proposition is labor, so they've come up with a camera system that reads that scores the bunks before they start feeding every time, and they're looking to move towards autonomous feed wagons.
Oh.
And so it's been kind of interesting. And a good friend of mine, Justin Sprague with Pro Ag Engineering, and I have worked quite a bit on it. We've designed a feed yard where cattle and feed wagons never have to cross, because every electric vehicle's problem is it can't discern a gate. So if we've eliminated the gates for the electric vehicles, we can move cattle freely. We haven't built it yet, but I do think it's coming.
Well, now I'm intrigued. I want to see the design, because I'm trying to figure out how do you get it to where cattle don't cross a driveway.
They have their own driveways, and the driveways never intersect.
That's pretty cool. That's neat.
So what about expansion? So I don't have $8 million, but I got $2 million, let's say.
Okay.
So I'm going to build this building. Tanner made a good point. He says, if you're going to overbuild anything, build a commodities building bigger. Okay. So I was smart, and I listened to him, and I built a commodity building bigger. But now we're expanding. It's been good. Prices are good. We're making more money. I've networked with you. We're 5 years into it.
Correct.
How do I expand this thing and buy another 500 head? Do we make them designed so that for the future we can add on?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of guys will say, well, we'll just add on to the east or west. But typically, the best way to do it is just go 100 foot to the north or south and just do the expansion there.
A lot like hog barns.
Yeah.
Instead of just knocking out the east wall, go north or south of it.
Is the pit the same then?
No, new barn, new pit.
New barn, new pit.
Total new structure.
So total new structure.
Yeah. You did need to dig the same amount of pit space, whether you went east or west or north or
Gotcha.
south.
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about expansion, like how you grow that.
So everybody always says, well, why don't I just go to the east or west end? Well, your turnaround is there today when you're feeding, because you're going to come back and feed on the north side. I'm going to eliminate that for 3 to 4 months. So for 3 or 4 months, 2 or 3 times a day, you're going to drive up the length of your barn, and you're going to have to go in reverse and do it again on the north side.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to live that way. So
No, because it's even annoying for the 1 week that you're pumping liquid manure out, and you still have to pull up to where the pump's getting pumped out and back up.
Correct.
Because that's the other thing. I'm glad that this is coming up in conversation, because that's the other difference between a hog barn and a cattle shed, is bunks are on the outside of a cattle shed.
Correct.
And typically you have to insert a pit pump in line with where the bunks are at.
Correct.
Corey has pump outs in his hog barn to where it doesn't disrupt any of the daily operation, except for you probably don't want to be in the barn while they're stirring.
No, maybe a feed truck or two.
But you're right. When you're pumping liquid manure out of a deep pitted cattle shed, that feed truck, feed wagon, whichever it is, can only go up to where the pump out is.
Correct.
It has to back up and re-enter.
Right.
Yeah.
And all that has to, because you have kind of dog houses on the outside of your hog barn.
Yep.
Because hog manure is very viscous, very liquid, where cattle manure is thick. And so you have to be inside the pit area when you're agitating and pumping.
Have you guys seen those shirts? They're maybe yoga pants or something. I don't know. It's on my Facebook feed. It just says thick. It just says thick. Maybe you should get some manure shirts. They'd be like
Those,
thick.
I thought those were from
Cattle
high
manure.
school. I thought that was from like high school age when they used to have juicy or whatever.
Yeah, it just says thick. Maybe you can make some shirts.
I
and
know
be
what
good.
your TikTok out.
Let's bring this all. Let's bring this all back in. Sure. Let's round this up here to wrap this up, because I want to talk the future of the end market. You hit a little bit on it as to are we getting rid of a sale barn? But now I want to kind of get, we've talked all about what barn, what style, how big, when, where, and how. But now you've got some experience that we haven't had to give our listeners in the past about the packing plant side of things.
Yeah. So we've been 10 Corp and the founder of 10 Corp, Chad Tenninger, 3.5, 4 years ago, we started down the path to build a packing plant. And we've got 130-acre site just south of Council Bluffs. It would be called Cattleman's Heritage. It'll process 2,000 head a day. Currently, the state of Iowa ships about 1.3 million cattle outside the state to to be processed. Now, we all know some of them are just going into Omaha, not very far out of the state, but it's dollars that are leaving the state.
Schuyler, Omaha, yep.
So, so Cattleman's Heritage will break ground, I'm guessing, late May, June. be about a 2-year build, and then we're off to the races to start.
Is this the
processing.
packing plant that all the cattlemen could invest in?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
So I've heard negative about this, that there's no way you're big enough to outdo the three large boys in the world, and that's why they want to build their own entity anyways, is to not have to
have influence in the market without the market influencing them.
That's correct. But I've heard from a friend in Missouri that they started their own deal, got into Fairway, got into Hy-Vee, and basically they were told, I'm sorry, we can't buy your stuff anymore because otherwise the big boys aren't going to use us and we can't have that. Is there a fear of that? I mean, how big do you have to be to outdo the status quo?
You know, we to give you a little bit of an evolution arc, you know, we started at, we thought we'd just dip our toe in it and, well, let's build a 500 head a day. And, you know, you're seeing a lot in Iowa that people are contemplating a load a day. 500, the scale didn't work. 1,000, the scale didn't work to keep.
Because that was Tama, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Tama had one. They built one, and
Yep. And then, you know, at 1,500, it seemed like we narrowed the gap, and at 2,000, I feel we've closed the gap on the cost of the production of the animal, because you have to have total carcass utilization. You know, if you're smaller, you know, what are you going to do with all the stuff that can't be eaten? You know, where when you have scale, now that becomes a revenue. You know, a small plant, you know, 50 head a day plant, they're paying to have their hides hauled away, where if the hides come out of a confinement barn, there's actually a premium attached to them, and you're probably wearing them on your feet right now.
Gotcha.
So yes, as you've seen in the news, you know, there's other packing plants that are being built in the United States right now that the retailer has invested in, and we have retailers at the door looking to invest. So if they're investing in a packing plant, they probably don't care what the Big Four are thinking
Gotcha.
about.
Okay, got it.
That's cool, because that is one thing that obviously has gained national news and headlines and even legislature attention.
Sure.
Is the price fixing.
Yep.
The fact that, yes, the hog industry is very vertically integrated, but there's also been some concerns on the beef side.
Correct. Yeah, no, and they're legitimate concerns, and I'm very familiar with the guy in Missouri, and I think his plant was about a 500 head a day plant.
Yep.
And at 500 head a day, you're not taking up enough shelf space in a Fairway or a Hy-Vee or a different grocery
to make the
store.
juice worth the squeeze.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. That's a great way of putting
It
it.
still sounds like a lot, 500 head a day.
I can't fathom 2,000.
Well, so in perspective, you know, the United States processes about 125,000 head a day. So we're 1 to 2% of production per day at 2,000. So
I guess that makes sense. When we were down in Orlando, I remember making that comment to you guys that just the amount of food to feed everyone down here is amazing.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And it's always beef or chicken or
and that's
something.
one little spot in the world.
Yeah.
And you don't see a farm anywhere that we walked up and down Independence Road.
correct.
Well, good. What did we miss, Bill?
You know, things that a guy, if he's thinking about doing one, if he's in Iowa, I'm a big fan of the Coalition to Support Iowa Farmers. They'll come out and make a free visit, tell you your siting concerns, kind of give you some front-end advice at no charge. And then after that visit, I would recommend a guy reaching out to an engineer. I think ProAg Engineering is probably the best to deal with. They're in the space every day, not just on cattle, on all protein. So if a guy has a hog site, he should be thinking about it. And get your house in order. You know, make sure you're checking all the boxes before you start getting ready to build something.
So if we have a listener wanting to build something this summer, is that a legitimate mission that they could accomplish?
Yes, absolutely.
Good.
So what's the return? If I'm a farmer that is row crop, and I'm a row crop guy that has been making pretty good money, been making pretty good, commodities are good, okay, I like the prices, I like that, but I see this as a way to diversify in case the war with Ukraine stops, and let's put a little money over here. So I'm going to diversify. I have the equipment already. I'm a listener. I have equipment. I have the land. I have the corn crop. I'm paying for fertilizer. This could be a pretty viable option, right? Or am I reading that wrong?
So, I'll take the insurance agent, the accountant's realm of it's going to depend. because, this is be a depreciable asset that'll go on your taxes, and it'll provide you a potential tax benefit. What does that potential savings have in effect for you?
We don't know.
If you're paying all cash for it versus if you're borrowing money from me, same thing goes. What quality of cattle are you going to put in it? Because if your plan's to go buy junk cattle, or if you're going to go for something that's maybe all black hided, and you're gonna shoot for a niche market on the sale end, everything depends.
Have you ever had someone that isn't in cattle but is a farmer get into cattle?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll go back to the land side a second, okay? So you've got a son that's getting ready to graduate Iowa State, and you want to bring him home. He wants to come home, okay? Your operation doesn't generate enough cash today to bring him home. So if you went out and bought an 80 for $1.6 million, is what we just talked about before this podcast started, when could that young man realize a wage, let alone an ROI, at $20,000 a ground?
The next time it sells.
Correct.
The next time it sells.
Dead.
Yep.
Where you could spend the same $1.6 million on 1,000 head cattle barn, and he could have a wage literally day one.
So can the starting farmer loan work for this?
Yes.
Yep.
Because it's up to $600,000.
How at hog barns, we kind of judge everything by how long it takes to get paid off. It used to be 8 to 10 years and 12 to 15, and now there's some pushing beyond that.
Correct.
What's average on a cattle barn?
The more established guys that don't need a lot of cash out of it, we're seeing a lot of 10, 12, maybe 15-year amorts. The young guy that needs some cash flow because he's got a wife and a small child behind him or something, they're putting it on 20-year amorts. The big deal is in a 20-year deal, you've probably invested a lot of money making your hog barn fresh again, where in cattle you probably haven't spent any real money to freshen it up.
So what about the financing side? Interest is ridiculous now. We can't borrow money from Tanner. It's too expensive.
Sure.
You guys are willing to put cattle in and build them. Do you guys offer any sort of financing?
We don't really have financing options. We'll leave that to Tanner and guys like him. But I think, and Tanner may cringe when I say this, marry the project and date the interest rate.
Yeah.
In a couple of years, you're probably going to refinance.
Sound like a realtor.
It's not statistically untrue. I mean, if you look at the environment, especially over the 20-year life of a loan,
Right.
even if you compare it to the housing market and a home loan, there are very few people that will take a 30-year fixed rate mortgage.
We talked about this just
for
the other
the
day.
entire 30 years of that mortgage. Now, I'm not telling you put it on a 3-year arm.
No.
But you can make other decisions that allow you options down the road.
I've never heard it
No.
that way. I'm stealing that. Marry the project.
Every realtor
I've
says
never
that.
heard it that way.
Every realtor that hasn't quit that started in 2020 has literally been like, marry the project and date the interest
Date the
rate.
interest
Yeah.
I just saw, the Fed just raised it at quarter yesterday, am I right?
Yep.
And I saw in the news late in the day yesterday that it's the highest that it's been since 2008.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay. And what was it in 2011?
Oh, yeah. We were
Half of what it is today. So it's
basically.
are you going to tell me we're going to go back to double-digit interest rates?
They're already predicting that first and second quarter of 24 are going to be decreases again in rates.
Correct.
So, I mean, if the odds projected from those that do this for a living are already saying it's going to go back down, it certainly doesn't mean it's going to go straight to double digits.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where, as you know, on the hog side, construction prices are a constant. They're always going up.
Feels like it.
Certainly does.
I mean, it's $425, $450 a space now to build a barn. When I got in, it was $300.
Yeah.
So if you guys are doing the processing too, let's go back to the price fixing deal. Just like, so do you get to negotiate what your hogs sell
I'm
for?
completely contract.
So you're completely
But,
contract.
but the pig owners do have a little bit if they're big enough.
Is there any incentive to go to bring the cattle to your barns, or is that written into your contract? Like if I get cattle from you, are they probably going to your?
The plant's not built yet.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. So, yes, if you are an investor or if you own shackles, there are premiums associated with that. So if you were involved with the processing plant today, and we just decided to buy Tanner's cattle the same day 3 years out from now, you will get a premium and he wouldn't.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
And I would say also when shit hits fan, if you have shackle space, they're going to kill those.
Correct.
And not probably buy open market load type
Correct.
stuff to people that don't have shackle space, so you don't get preference.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap this baby up because we're going to get down into a whole bucket of weeds if we continue to follow that one.
I kind of like the bucket of weeds.
That's the questions everybody has.
I will
This
do,
is fun. I'm glad to come back and do this anytime.
So
will
when you're
do
price
my-
fixing on this box beef,
Exactly. Are we more left-sided?
what I meant to say is let's summarize this so we can
Oh,
start
okay.
negotiating our shackle space.
right.
I will summarize. One of you guys gets the challenge, and then we'll let Bill give his contact information out. So as we talked here, we talked a lot of different options for how we're going to finish fat cattle. We
Correct.
talked that this could even be something that applies to a cow-calf herd and gets that calf from a younger age up into feeder side.
Correct.
We have deep pitted options. We have bed pack options. We have open lot options. We kind of arrived at an assumption, at least a consensus here in the room, that the deep pitted barns are going to provide more opportunity for a better return on investment as long as their money's not an option to build them.
Correct.
Now, when you bring that factor in, we've added so much more to the calculation to where you as a listener are going to have to figure that out. But we're going to save labor. We're going to save material. We're going to potentially enrich the nutrients that are coming through the manure. We're going to potentially have a building that lasts longer, has a longer useful life, and cattle that gain faster. So a couple of the benefits that we got out of this. We also reminded ourselves and our listeners that there's more to feeding cattle than just have a barn. We also have to prepare for the equipment acquisition if we don't already have those, plus the way to store and maintain the commodities that go into the livestock themselves. We talked about as we build these structures that it could be a wood frame, could be a steel frame, but most commonly is concrete at least up to the height of where an animal can touch or higher to make sure we do those. We also learned that pen size does matter. So no matter what she tells you, it does matter, and we also need to make sure we've got adequate bunk space. Then we moved on to a little bit about science and advancement in technologies around aerobic digesters and what we're doing with capturing some of the cattle manure and the advancements that's headed. And then we got even into the little bit on the packing side of things. So we covered a lot on today's episode, and I hope our listeners are happy with that because they asked for a lot. Right, Bill?
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. All right, what's our challenge?
So I got two.
Okay.
First one's real easy. Eat beef.
Correct.
Like,
Done.
Either if you got it in your freezer, go thaw a piece out, or go thaw a couple steaks or some hamburger.
Right.
If not, go to the grocery store, get yourself a steak. My second one is if you have someone coming back to your farm, son or daughter, you could be in livestock now, maybe not. Check this out because times might be good right now or coming out of good times, but livestock is a tremendous way to diversify, and we're all about diversification on the Farm4Profit podcast. It not only could give you possibility of making more money on another income stream on the livestock side, but then another income stream of you could make the feed
Correct.
for it. And that's when you can start growing alfalfa and other things beyond
Right.
corn and soybeans and stuff like that. That's
I
a
like
good
the way
to
of
diversify.
it's a way to bring the kids home and have enough revenue for the kids.
Right.
Correct.
More work involved that maybe grandparents or dads don't want to do, but the kids, that's how you started.
That's how I started in the
Yep.
pigs. It's not all glory, especially on the pig side of things.
It's not all peaches and
It's
cream.
a means to an end. It keeps me on the farm.
But no one ever wants to wear the pig hat or the pig boots to town.
No,
Everybody likes
No.
to wear the cowboy hat and the cowboy boots.
we should have cowboy
Oh,
hats on.
ding dong.
There you go.
Yeah.
I like that. But last question we ask before you get to share your contact information, we ask every guest, what does success look like to you?
That's a great, great question. I'm going to say it's kind of like an onion, a couple layers. First, obviously being a good husband and a good member of my family, you know, to my brother and nephews and stuff like that. Secondly, having great conversations and collaborations with other people. I've really enjoyed this last hour. I think a connection that's gained through a close, vulnerable conversation is really imperative. And then thirdly, helping a producer change his operation and grow it hopefully and see the evolution over a 5 or 10 year span.
Well, I think you've had a huge impact on our listeners and a huge impact on Dave because I don't know if I've seen this man react like he has the entire show of things I know he's going to say again and again and again. You're going to steal the onion thing, aren't you?
I just said it. Have you ever seen Shrek? Onions have layers. You know what else have layers? Parfait. Everybody loves parfait. I don't know anybody love parfait.
All right, as we send out, how do people find you if they've got questions or want to
Sure.
learn more?
10 Corp is easy to find on the website. Cattleman's Heritage, if you need information on the beef processing plan, or my cell's 515-418-1822.
Awesome. This has been a pleasure, listeners. Hopefully you enjoyed it just as much as we did. But until next time, have a good one.